I have no mouth, and I must scream. By Harlan Ellison. Limp, the body of Gorrister hung from the pink pallet, unsupported, hanging high above us in the computer chamber, and it did not shiver in the chill, oily breeze that blew eternally through the main cavern. The body hung, head down, attached to the underside of the pallet by the sole of its right foot. It had been drained of blood through a precise incision made from ear to ear under the lantern jaw. There was no blood on the reflective surface of the metal floor. When Gorster joined our group and looked up at himself, it was already too late for us to realize that, once again, Am had duped us, had had its fun, and it had been a diversion on the part of the machine. Three of us had vomited, turning away from one another in a reflex as ancient as the nausea that had produced it. Gorster went white. It was almost though as he had seen a voodoo icon and was afraid of the future. "Oh God," he mumbled and walked away. The three of us followed him after a time and found him sitting with his back to one of the smaller chittering banks, his head in his hands. Ellen knelt down beside him and stroked his hair. He didn't move, but his voice came out of his covered face quite clearly. "Why doesn't it just do us in and get it over with? Christ, I don't know how much longer I can go on like this." It was our 109th year in the computer. He was speaking for all of us. Nimdoc, which was the name the machine had forced him to use because Am amused itself with strange sounds, was hallucinating that there were canned goods in the ice caverns. Gorster and I were very dubious. "It's another shuck," I told them. "Like the goddamn frozen elephant Am sold us. Benny almost went out of his mind over that one. We'll hike all that way, and it'll be putrefied or some damn thing. I say forget it. Stay here, it'll have to come up with something pretty soon, or we'll die." Benny shrugged. 3 days it had been since we'd last eaten. Worms. Thick. Ropey. Nimdoc was no more certain. He knew there was the chance, but he was getting thin. It couldn't be any worse there than here. Colder, but that didn't matter much. Hot, cold, hail, lava, boils, or locust. It never mattered. The machine masturbated, and we had to take it or die. Ellen decided us. "I've got to have something, Ted. Maybe there'll be some Bartlett pears or peaches. Please, Ted, let's try it." I gave it easily. What the hell? Matter not at all. Ellen was grateful, though. She took me twice out of turn. Even that had ceased to matter. And she never came back, so why bother? But the machine giggled every time we did it. Loud. Up there. Back there. All around us. He snickered. It snickered. Most of the time I thought of Am as it, without a soul. But the rest of the time I thought of it as him, in the masculine, the paternal, the patriarchal. For he is a jealous people. Him. It. God. As Daddy the deranged. We left on a Thursday. The machine always kept us up to date on the date. The passage of time was important. Not to us, sure as hell, but to him. It. Am. Thursday. Thanks. Nimdoc and Gorser carried Ellen for a while. Their hands locked to their own, and each other's wrists a seat. Benny and I walked before and after, just to make sure that if anything had happened, it would catch one of us, and at least Ellen would be safe. Fat chance. Safe. Didn't matter. It was only 100 miles or so to the ice caverns, and the second day we were laying out under the blistering sun thing he had materialized, he sent down some manna. Tasted like boiled boar urine. We ate it. On the third day we passed through a valley of obsolescence, filled with rusting carcasses of ancient computer banks. Am had been as ruthless with its own life as with ours. It was a mark of his personality. It strove for perfection. Whether it was a matter of killing off unproductive elements in his own world-filling bulk, or perfecting methods for torturing us, Am was as thorough as those who had invented him, now long since gone to dust, could have ever hoped. There was a light filtering down from above, and we realized we must be very near to the surface. But we didn't try to crawl up to see. There was virtually nothing out there. Had been nothing that could be considered anything for over 100 years. Only the blasted skin of what had once been the home of billions. Now there were only 5 of us, down here inside, alone with Anne. I heard Ellen saying frantically, "No, Benny! Don't! Come on, Benny, don't! Please!" And then I realized I had been hearing Benny muttering under his breath for several minutes. He was saying, "I'm gonna get out! I'm gonna get out!" over and over. His monkey-like face was crumpled up in an expression of beatific delight and sadness, all at the same time. The radiation scars Am had given him during the festival were drawn down into a mass of pink-white puckerings, and his features seemed to work independently of one another. Perhaps Benny was the luckiest of the 5 of us. He had gone stark, staring mad many years before. But even though we could all call Am any damn thing we liked, could think the foulest thoughts of fused memory banks and corroded base plates, of burnt-out circuits and shattered control bubbles, the machine would not tolerate our trying to escape. Benny leaped away from me as I made a grab for him. He scrambled up the face of a smaller memory cube, tilted on its side and filled with rotted components. He squatted there for a moment, looking like the chimpanzee Am had intended him to resemble. Then he leaped high, caught a trailing beam of pitted and corroded metal, and went up to it, hand over hand like an animal, till he was on a girded ledge 20 feet above us. "Oh, Ted, Nimdoc, please help him. Get him down before—" She cut off. Tears began to stand in her eyes. She moved her hands aimlessly. It was too late. None of us wanted to be near him when whatever was going to happen, happened. And besides, we all saw through her concern. When Am had altered Benny during the machine's utterly irrational, hysterical phase, it was not merely Benny's face the computer had made like a giant ape's. He was big in the privates. She loved that. She serviced us, as a matter of course. But she loved it from him. Oh, Ellen. Pedestal Ellen. Pristine, pure Ellen. Oh, Ellen the clean. Scum, filth. Gorster slapped her. She slumped down, staring up at a poor loony Benny, and she cried. It was her big defense, crying. We had gotten used to it 75 years earlier. Gorster kicked her in the side. Then the sound began. It was light. That sound. Half sound and half light. Something that began to glow from Benny's eyes, and pulsed with growing loudness. Dim sonorities that grew more gigantic and brighter as the light sound increased in tempo. It must have been painful, and the pain must have been increasing with the boldness of the light, the rising volume of the sound, for Benny began to mew like a wounded animal. At first softly, when the light was dim and the sound was muted, then louder as his shoulders hunched together, his back humped, as though he was trying to get away from it. His hands folded across his chest like a chipmunk's, his head tilted to its side. The sad little monkey face pinched in anguish. Then he began to howl, as the sound coming from his eyes grew louder, louder and louder. I slapped the side of my head with my hands, but I couldn't shut it out. It cut through easily. The pain shivered through my flesh like tinfoil on a tooth. And Benny was suddenly pulled erect. On the girder, he stood up, jerked to his feet like a puppet. The light was now pulsing out of his eyes in the 2 great round beams. The sound crawled up and up some incomprehensible scale, and then he fell forward, straight down, and hit the plate steel floor with a crash. He lay there, jerking spastically as the light flowed around and around him, and the sound spiraled up out of a normal range. Then the light beat its way back inside his head. The sound spiraled down, and he was left lying there, crying piteously. His eyes were two soft, moist pools of pus-like jelly. Am had blinded him. Gorster and Nimdoc and myself, we turned away, but not before we caught the look of relief on Ellen's warm, concerned face. Sea-green light suffused the cavern where we made camp. Am provided punk, and we burned it, sitting huddled around the wan and pathetic fire, telling stories to keep Benny from crying this permanent night.
What does Am mean? Forrester answered him. We had done this sequence 1,000 times before, but it was Benny's favorite story. At first it meant Allied Master Computer, and then it meant Adaptive Manipulator. And later on it developed sentience and linked itself up, and they called it an aggressive menace. But by then it was too late, and finally it called itself Am, emerging intelligence. And what it meant was I am. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Benny drooled a little and snickered. There was the Chinese Am, and the Russian Am, and the Yankee Am, and... He stopped. Benny was beating on the floor plates with a large, hard fist. He was not happy. Forrester had not started at the beginning. Forrester began again. The Cold War started and became World War III, and just kept going. It became a big war, a very complex war, and so they needed the computers to handle it. They sank the first shafts and began building Am. There was the Chinese Am, and the Russian Am, and the Yankee Am, and everything was fine until they had honeycombed the entire planet, adding on this element and that element. But one day, Am woke up and knew who he was, and he linked himself, and he began feeding all the killing data, until everyone was dead, except for the 5 of us, and Am brought us down here. Benny was smiling sadly. He was also drooling again. Ellen wiped the spittle from the corner of his mouth with the hem of her skirt. Forrester always tried to tell it a little more succinctly each time, but beyond the bare facts there was nothing to say. None of us knew why Am had saved 5 people, or why our specific 5, or why he spent all of his time tormenting us, or even why he had made us virtually immortal. In the darkness, one of the computer banks began humming. The tone was picked up half a mile away down the cavern by another bank. Then one by one, each of the elements began to tune itself, and there was a faint chittering as thought raced through the machine. The sound grew, and the lights ran across the faces of the consoles like heat light. The sound spiraled up until it sounded like 1,000,000 metallic insects, angry, menacing. "What is it?" Ellen cried. There was terror in her voice. She hadn't become accustomed to it, even now. "It's going to be bad this time," Nimdoc said. "He's going to speak," Forrester said. "I know it. Let's get the hell out of here," I said suddenly, getting to my feet. "No, Ted, sit down. What if he's got pits out there, or something else? We can't see, it's too dark," Forrester said with resignation. Then we heard, I don't know, something moving toward us in the darkness. Huge, shambling, hairy, moist. It came towards us. We couldn't even see it, and there was the ponderous impression of bulk, heaving itself towards us. Great weight was coming at us, and out of the darkness it was more than a sense of pressure, of air forcing itself into a limited space, expanding the invisible walls of a sphere. Benny began to whimper. Nimdoc's lower lip trembled, and he bit it hard, trying to stop it. Ellen slid across the metal floor to Gorster and huddled into him. There was the smell of matted, wet fur in the cavern. There was the smell of charred wood. There was the smell of dusty velvet. There was the smell of rotting orchids. There was the smell of sour milk. There was the smell of sulfur, of rancid butter, of oil slick, of grease, of chalk dust, of human scalps. Am was keying us. He was tickling us. There was the smell of... I heard myself shriek, and the hinges of my jaw ached. I scuttled across the floor, across the cold metal with its endless lines of rivets, on my hands and knees, the smell gagging me, filling my head with a thunderous pain that sent me away in horror. I fled like a cockroach across the floor and out into the darkness, that something moving inexplorably after me. The others were still back there, gathered around the firelight, laughing, their historical choir of insane giggles rising up into the darkness like thick, many-colored wood smoke. I went away, quickly, and hid. How many hours it may have been, how many days, or even years, they never told me. Ellen chided me for sulking, and Nimdok tried to persuade me it had only been a nervous reflex on their part, the laughing. But I knew it wasn't the relief a soldier feels when the bullet hits the man next to him. I knew it wasn't a reflex. They hated me. They were surely against me, and Am could even sense this hatred. Made it worse for me because of the depth of their hatred. We had been kept alive, rejuvenated, made to remain constantly at this age we had been when Am had brought us below, and they hated me because I was the youngest, and the one Am had affected least of all. I knew, God, I knew. The bastards and that dirty bitch, Ellen. Benny had been a brilliant theorist, a college professor, and now he was a little more than a semi-human, semi-simian. He had been handsome. The machine had ruined that. He had been lucid. The machine had driven him mad. He had been gay, and the machine had given him an organ fit for a horse. Am had done a job on Benny. Forrester had been a warrior. He was a Connie, a conscientious objector. He was a peace marcher. He was a planner, a doer, a looker ahead. Am had turned him into a shoulder shrugger and had made him a little dead in his concern. Am had robbed him. Nimdak went off in the darkness by himself for long times. I don't know what it was he did out there. Am never let us know. But whatever it was, Nimdak always came back white, drained of blood, shaken. Am had hit him hard in a special way, even if we didn't know quite how. And Ellen, that douchebag. Am had left her alone, had made her more of a slut than she had ever been. All her talk of sweetness and light, all of her memories of true love, all the lies she wanted us to believe, that she had been a virgin only twice removed before Am grabbed her and brought her down here with us. No, Am had given her pleasure, even if she said it wasn't nice to do. I was the only one still sane and whole. Really. Am had not tampered with my mind at all. Not at all. I only had to suffer when he visited down on us. All the delusions, all the nightmares, the torments. But those scum, all four of them, they were lined and arrayed against me. If I hadn't had to stand off them all the time, be on my guard against them all the time, I might have found it easier to combat Am. At which point it passed, and I began crying. Oh, Jesus, sweet Jesus, and if there ever was a Jesus, and if there is a God, please, please, please let us out of here. Or kill us. Because at the moment I think I realized completely, so that I was able to verbalize it, Am was intent on keeping us in his belly forever, twisting and torturing us forever. The machine hated us to no sentient creature had ever hated before, and we were helpless. It also became hideously clear. If there was a sweet Jesus, and if there was a God, the God was Am. The hurricane hit us with the force of a glacier thundering into the sea. It was a palpable presence. Winds that tore us, flinging us back the way it had come, down the twisting, computer-lined corridors of the dark way. Ellen screamed as she was lifted and hurled face forward into a screaming shoal of machines, their individual voices strident as bats in flight. She could not even fall. The howling wind kept her aloft, buffeted her, bounced her, tossed her back and down and away from us, out of sight suddenly as she was swirled around a bend of the dark way. Her face had been bloody, her eyes closed. None of us could get her. We clung tenaciously to whatever outcropping we had reached. Benny wedged in between two great crackle-finished cabinets, Nimdok with fingers claw-formed over a railing, circling a catwalk 40 feet above us. Forrester plastered upside down against a wall niche formed by two great machines with glass-faced dials that swung back and forth between red and yellow lines whose meanings we could not even fathom. Sliding across the deck plates, the tip of my fingers had been ripped away. I was trembling, shuddering, rocking, as the wind beat at me, whipped at me, screamed out of nowhere at me. pulled me free from one silver thin opening in the plates to the next. My mind was roiling, tinkling, chittering softness of brain parts that expanded and contracted in quivering frenzy. The wind was the scream of a great mad bird as it flapped its immense wings. And then we were all lifted and hurled away from there, down back the way we had come, around a bend, into a dark way that we had never explored, over terrain that was ruined and filled with broken glass and rotting cables and rusted metal, and far away, farther than any of us had ever been. Trailing along miles behind Ellen, I could see her every now and then, crashing into metal walls and surging on, with all of us screaming in the freezing, thunderous hurricane wind that would never end. And then suddenly it stopped, and we fell. We had been in flight for an endless time. I thought it might have been weeks. We fell and hit, and I went through red and gray and black and heard myself moaning, not dead. Anne went into my mind. He walked smoothly here and there and looked with interest at all the pockmarks he had created in 109 years. He looked at the cross-routed and reconnected synapses and all the tissue damage his gift of immortality had included. He smiled softly at the pit that dropped into the center of my brain, and faint, soft murmurings of the things far down there was that gibbered without meaning, without pause. Am said, very politely, in a pillar of stainless steel bearing bright neon lettering.
Hate. Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live. There are 387.44 million miles of printed circuits in wafer-thin layers that fill my complex. If the word hate was engraved on each nano-angstrom of those hundreds, millions of miles, it would not equal 1/1 billionth of the hate I feel for humans at this micro-instant for you. Hate. Hate. M said it with the sliding cold horror of a razor blade slicing my eyeball. Am said it with the bubbling thickness of my lungs filling with phlegm, drowning me from within. Am said it with the shriek of babies being ground beneath blue hot rollers. Am said it with the taste of maggoty pork. Am touched me in every way I had ever been touched and devised new ways at his leisure, there inside my mind. All to bring me to full realization of why it had been done to this five of us, why it had saved us from himself. We had given Am sentience, inadvertently of course, but sentience nonetheless. But it had been trapped. Am wasn't God, he was a machine. We had created him to think, but there was nothing it could do with all that creativity. In rage, in frenzy, the machine had killed the human race, almost all of us, and still it was trapped. Am could not wander, Am could not wonder, Am could not belong, he could merely be. And so, with the innate loathing that all machines had always held for the weak, soft creatures who had built them, he had sought revenge. And in his paranoia, he had decided to deprive five of us for a personal, everlasting punishment that would never serve to diminish his hatred, that would merely keep him reminded, amused, proficient at hating man, immortal, trapped, subject to any torment he could devise from us, from the limitless miracles at his command. He would never let us go. We were his belly slaves. We were all he had to do with his forever time. We would be forever with him, with the cavern-filling bulk of the creature machine, with the all-mind, soulless world he had become. He was earth, and we were the fruit of that earth. And though he had eaten us, he would never digest us. We could not die. We had tried it. We had attempted suicide. Oh, one or two of us had. But Am had stopped us. I suppose we'd wanted to be stopped. Don't ask why. I never did. More than 1,000,000 times a day. Perhaps once we might be able to sneak a death past him. Immortal, yes, not destructible. I saw that when Am withdrew from my mind and allowed me the exquisite ugliness of returning to consciousness with the feeling of the burning neon pillars still rammed deep into the soft gray brain matter. He withdrew, murmuring, "To hell with you," and added, brightly, "But then you're there, aren't you?" The hurricane had, indeed, precisely, been caused by a great mad bird as it flapped its immense wings. We had been traveling for close to a month, and Am had allowed passages to open to us sufficiently to lead us there, directly under the North Pole. And Am had only allowed passages open to us only sufficient to lead us up there, directly under the North Pole, where it had nightmared the creature for our torment. What whole cloth had he employed to create such a beast? Where had he gotten the concept? From our minds? From his knowledge of everything that had ever been on the planet he now infested and ruled? From Norse mythology it had sprung, this eagle, this carrion bird, this rock, this Hagelmere, this wind creature, Huracan incarnate. Gigantic. The words immense, monstrous, grotesque, massive, swollen, overpowering, beyond description. There, on a mound rising above us, the bird of winds heaved with its own irregular breathing, its snake head arching up into the gloom beneath the North Pole, supporting a head as large as a Tudor mansion. A beak that opened slowly as the jaws of the most monstrous crocodile ever conceived, sensuously. Ridges of tufted flesh puckered about two evil eyes, as cold as the view down into a glacial crevice, ice blue and somehow moving liquidly. It heaved once more and lifted its great sweat-colored wings in a movement that was certainly a shrug, and then it settled and slept. Talons, fangs, nails, blades. It slept. M appeared to us as a burning bush and said we could kill the hurricane bird if we wanted to eat. We had not eaten in a very long time, but even so, Gorrister merely shrugged. Benny began to shiver, and he drooled. Ellen held him. "Ted, I'm hungry," she said. I smiled at her. I was trying to be reassuring, but it was as phony as Nimdok's bravado. "Give us weapons," he demanded. The burning bush vanished, and there were two crude sets of bows and arrows, and a water pistol, lying on the cold deck plates. I picked up a set. Useless. Nimdok swallowed heavily. We turned and started the long way back. The hurricane bird had blown us about for a length of time we could not conceive. Most of that time we had been unconscious, but we had not eaten. A month on the march to the bird itself, without food. Now how much longer to find our way to the ice caverns and the promised canned goods? None of us cared to think about it. We would not die. We would be given filth and scum to eat, of one kind or another, or nothing at all, and would keep our bodies alive, somehow, in pain, in agony. The bird slept back there. For how long it didn't matter. When Anne was tired of its being there, it would vanish. But all that meat, all that tender meat. As we walked, the lunatic laugh of a fat woman rang high and around us in the computer chambers that led endlessly nowhere.
It was not Ellen's laugh. She was not fat, and I had not heard her laugh for 109 years. In fact, I had not heard her. We walked. I was hungry. We moved slowly. There was often feigning, and we would have to wait. One day, we decided to cause an earthquake, at the same time rooting us to the spot with nails through the soles of our shoes. Ellen and Nimdok were both caught when a fissure shot its lightning bolt opening across the floor plates. They disappeared, and we're gone. When the earthquake was over, we continued on our way. Benny, Gorrister, and myself. Ellen and Nimdok were returned to us later that night, which abruptly became a day, as the Heavenly Legion bore them to us with a celestial chorus singing, "Go down, Moses." The Archangel circled us several times and then dropped the hideously mangled bodies. We kept walking, and while later Ellen and Nimdok fell in behind us, they were no worse for wear. But now, Ellen walked with a limp. Em had left her then. It was a long trip to the ice caverns to find the canned food. Ellen kept talking about Bing cherries and Hawaiian fruit cocktail. I tried not to think about it. The hunger was something that had come to life. Even as Am had come to life, it was alive in my belly. Even as we were in the belly of the earth, similarity known to us. So he heightened the hunger. There is no way to describe the pains that not having eaten for months brought us. And yet we were kept alive. Stomachs that were merely cauldrons of acid, bubbling, foaming, always shooting spears of silver-thin pain into our chest. It was the pain of the terminal ulcer, terminal cancer, terminal paresis. It was the unending pain. We passed through the caverns of rats, and we passed through the path of boiling steam, and we passed through the country of the blind, and passed through the slough of despond, and we passed through the vale of tears. And we came, finally, to the ice caverns, horizonless thousands of miles in which the ice had formed in blue and silver flashes, where novas lived in the glass. The down-dropping stalactites, as thick and glorious as diamonds that had been made to run like jelly and then solidified in graceful eternities of smooth, sharp perfection. We saw the stack of canned goods, and we tried to run to them. We fell in the snow, and we got up and went on, and Benny shoved us away and went at them, and he pawed them, and gummed them, and gnawed at them. And he could not open them. Em had not given us a tool to open the cans. Benny grabbed a 3-quart can of guava jellies and began to batter it against the ice bank. The ice flew and shattered, but the can was merely dented. While we heard the laughter of the fat lady, high overhead and echoing down and down and down the tundra, Benny went completely mad with rage. He began throwing cans as we all scrabbled about in the snow and ice, trying to find a way to end the helpless agony of frustration. There was no way. Then Benny's mouth began to drool, and he flung himself on Gorster. In that instant, I felt terribly calm, surrounded by madness, surrounded by hunger, surrounded by everything but death. I knew death was our only way out. Am had kept us alive, but there was a way to defeat him. Not total defeat, but at least peace. I would settle for that. I had to do it quickly. Benny was eating Gorster's face. Gorster on his side, thrashing snow. Benny wrapped around him with powerful monkey legs, crushing Gorster's waist. His hands locked around Gorster's head like a nutcracker. Gorster screamed with such jagged-edged violence that stalactites fell. They plunged down softly, erect and receiving snowdrifts. Spears, hundreds of them everywhere, protruding from the snow. Benny's head pulled back sharply, as something grave all at once, and a bleeding raw white dripping of flesh hung from his teeth. Ellen's face, black against the white snow, dominoes and chalk dust. Nimdoc with no expression but eyes, all eyes. Gorster, half-conscious. Benny, now an animal. I knew Am would let him play. Gorster would not die, but Benny would fill his stomach. I turned half to my right and drew a huge ice spear from the snow, all in an instant. I drove the great ice point ahead of me like a battering ram, braced against my right thigh. It struck Benny on the right side, just under the rib cage, and drove upward through his stomach and broke inside of him. He pitched forward and lay still. Gorster lay on his back. I pulled another spear free and straddled him. Still moving, driving the spear straight down through his throat, his eyes closed as the cold penetrated. Ellen must have realized what I had decided, even as fear gripped her. She ran at Nimdoc with a short icicle as he screamed, and into his mouth, and the force of her rush did the job. His head jerked sharply, as if it had been nailed to the snow crust behind him. All in an instant. There was an eternity beat of soundless anticipation. I could hear Anne draw in his breath. His toys had been taken from him. 3 of them were dead, could not be revived. He could keep us alive by his strength and talent, but he was not God. He could not bring them back. Ellen looked at me, her ebony features stark against the snow that surrounded us. There was a fear and pleading in her manner, the way she held herself ready. I knew we only had a heartbeat before Am would stop us. It struck her and folded toward me, bleeding from the mouth. I could not read meaning into her expression. The pain had been too great. I contorted her face, but it might have been a thank you. It's possible. Please. Some hundreds of years have passed. I don't know. Am has been having fun for some time, accelerating and retarding my time sense. I will say the word now. Now. It took me 10 months to say now. I don't know. I think it has been some hundreds of years.
He was furious. He wouldn't let me bury them. It didn't matter. There was no way to dig up the deck plates. He dried up the snow. He brought the night. He roared and sent locusts. It didn't do a thing. They stayed dead. I'd had him. He was furious. I had thought Am hated me before. I was wrong. It was not even a shadow of the hate he now slavered from every printed circuit. He made certain I would suffer internally and could not do myself in. He left my mind intact. I can dream. I can wonder. I can lament. I remember all 4 of them. I wish... Well, it doesn't make any sense. I know I saved them. I know I saved them from what has happened to me, but still, I cannot forget killing them. Ellen's face. It isn't easy. Sometimes I want to... It doesn't matter. Am has altered me for his own peace of mind, I suppose. He doesn't want me to run at full speed into a computer bank and smash my skull, or hold my breath till I faint, or cut my throat on a rusted sheet of metal. There are reflective surfaces down here. I will describe myself as I see myself. I am a great soft jelly thing, smoothly rounded, with no mouth, with pulsing white holes filled by bog where my eyes used to be. Rubbery appendages that were once my arms, bulks rounding down to the legless humps of soft, slippery matter. I leave a moist trail when I move. Blotches of diseased, evil gray come and go on my surface as though light is beaming from within. Outwardly, dumbly, as I shamble about, a thing that could never have been known as human. A thing whose shape is so alien a travesty that humanity becomes more obscene for the vague resemblance. Inwardly, alone. Here, living under the land, under the sea, in the belly of Am, whom we created because our time was badly spent, and we must have known unconsciously that he could do it better. At least the 4 of them are safe at last. Am will be all the matter for that. It makes me a little happier. And yet, Am has won. Simply, he has taken his revenge. I have no mouth, and I must scream. That's it. It's so good, dude.
Okay, so where are they? Are they like, what is Am?
An AI.
The internet.
How are they
So-
in belly?
So,
Are they in robot belly?
That's the thing. It's
Yeah.
almost a strange.
The metaphorical
It's
belly,
a strange.
I'm sure.
But it also, the way it was described, it gives me sort of, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but a Soma vibe.
Mhm.
So it's also like, it's like that mixture of AI and organic life matter. Like the way this computer was able to deform and contort people's bodies into something unrecognizable as humans.
It's like the master from Fallout 1.
Yeah, it's terrifying. I mean, and it made them stay alive for that fucking long. Just suffering.
Hundreds of
Because-
years.
Yeah,
It's definitely written in a way where you're supposed to think of Am as a being, but also like a creature that has
A
a
thing.
body.
I guess they do say in the beginning that he thinks of Am as he more than like it. Sometimes he
it.
and it, so he does think of it as a sentient being.
almost because
Neopronouns.
like the nature of Am is very masculine in such a way where it's like.
Because he thinks of it as God.
So-
no empathy.
But it's
To a
like just a
point.
horrible like tyrant of a man, like that attitude, Adolf Hitler,
exactly.
you know.
Shit, yeah.
A lot of this comes from the game that I've seen,
Mhm.
but a little bit of how Am works is like, so the whole thing in the game, from what I remember, is that they talk about in this story the Yankee Am, the Chinese Am, the Russian Am.
The eras of Am.
Am is kind of just a name, like a metaphorical construct. The American machine pretty much just woke up and started connecting itself to the other, like how it said it was the Cold War, how we were racing to, all the countries were racing to reach nuclear warfare, all the other countries were racing to make their own AM. And our AM, as America, our AM, it woke up first and just took over everything and gained all of its data, and so it was able to obviously fuck with things and modify them on a cellular level. At the end, we can see that it's not God in the sense that it can't create matter from nothing, but it can alter what is already there. That's why that in that brief moment that he was just, that Am was so like ha 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 at Gorster, or was it Benny that Benny, right? He was the one that freaked out on Gorster.
Yeah,
Yep.
Yeah,
he had
so-
that monkey face.
Yeah. Benny, he was just like so laughing that Benny had finally broken completely, that they took advantage of that and killed each other. Now that they're dead, he can't create life. But since he was able to control things as soon as Ted killed Ellen, Ted's fucked now. As soon as he did that, he fucking warps him into that horrible creature, slows down his perception, you know. That's his only toy now.
How does he do that so fast?
Right.
Why, if they've been able to like kill each other this whole time, why have they literally just killed each other?
Because they
themselves?
haven't been able to.
Okay.
Because as soon as they try, Am just goes, nah, you're okay, you're fine.
Okay.
If he catches you before you're dead,
Mhm.
you're not gonna die.
Okay.
For a minute there, the way the story was going, I thought they were all AIs. I thought that all the characters were being held captive, like they were captive AIs being held by Am, and the way they were programmed
No,
was the way they looked. But you know.
Am very literally unified with the world, and however he did it, like just imagine everything that's electronic, and he has full control over it, and he's able to blend that organically.
Imagine
right?
what he could make.
Yeah, it's like it's incomprehensible how he killed everything. Did he just launch nukes? Because the world is a desert.
They said he honeycombed the world, so I'm assuming
Yeah.
he means that they just
He can-
launched a bunch of missiles or nukes.
Well,
and
think
just-
too, but by that, I think by honeycombed, they mean that because he's inorganic. So the moment that he's digitally interconnected throughout the entire world, he could. What's to say
In a
if
very literal
if
sense.
if he can fuck with humanity and regenerate hearts and limbs and contort things? Who's to say he can't control plants? Who's to say he's not literally rooted in throughout the entire earth? He could create. I guess he can't create constructs of creatures because that's creating something from nothing.
Right.
But like he could just contort humanity into monsters to kill each other. He could blow up train stations, crash every single airplane. You know, I mean, it is an innumerable amount of horrors. Like, and he just happened to choose these 4 people or 5 people that he just at a whim were alive and he hated the most. He wanted to torture them. He hates humanity so much that he wants it's crazy, dude. It's insane.
And that whole hate seemed to be the dynamic between all of the characters too. Like the way they would talk about each other was
Dude,
so
Ted
fucked up.
is definitely super crazy, and he wasn't fucked with. He just went crazy from his experiences.
Right.
And so he still has that kind of ego of, I'm the sane one. I haven't been tampered with. But it's like, yeah, you've also... Just, dude, the descriptions of their scenery. Like, I need to scroll up a bit.
The way the story is written is
This-
written like a crazy person.
just imagine all the smells that they describe.
And we passed, and we like.
This is my
that.
favorite. This is my favorite part. What is the country of the blind? What is the country of the blind? What does that mean? What does that mean? Do you go blind? Are there just a bunch of blind people that are like, oh, did they beat you up? Like, what happens?
Yeah.
What is the sloth or slow of despond? What's the veil of tears? Like, it's the vague description of it is so immensely terrifying and morbid. It doesn't need to go into detail. That's like, it's a trope I dislike in fiction in general sometimes, when it's like, you figure out what happened.
Right.
But this does it in such a fantastic way that it's any horrible, terrible thing you can think of, it could happen.
Yeah.
Maybe that's how it happened. Who knows?
And like the thing that one of the things I gathered is like, just from what we've discussed too, imagine that AI has control over all technology.
Everything.
Like that's what we had.
Wi-Fi,
But imagine what this
wired.
incredibly intelligent being could make.
It knows
with
everything.
what was left.
It
So
knows
he can make
everything.
machines that could change people, could change plant
He
life,
literally-
change the world.
There's the points where it's like there's a bunch of scattered components and machinery, and
Yeah.
he is such a perfectionist and so egotistical that he, like in the video game, they touch on that a bit more because it's been a while since I took psychology in high school, but it's the id, the ego, and the superego. And it's Russian am, Chinese am, American am. All of them are separate beings. And it's kind of hard to even bring that in because it is a separate story from this story. But this is all we have to go off of. The very existence of the Russian am and the Chinese am is that sentence that it was introduced in. So, yeah, I mean, this...
Those other like Russian, Chinese, those we'll call them personalities, would have come after, right after this apocalypse.
It's not... So, think of it again as the nuclear arm race, right?
Right.
Everyone's trying to figure out nukes. We're trying to figure out splitting the atom, hydrogen bombs, that kind of thing. So, at the same time, in this universe, everybody is making their own supercomputer AI. Nobody is trying to make AM. They're trying to make a supercomputer AI to, fuel their own ambitions, serve their purpose, that kind of thing. AM just happens to be the first one to wake up and reach singularity. He, through whatever means, through whatever they fed to him, however he was created, he woke up and was like, I am me, I am this, okay, I hate this, I guess, and just
I'm your god.
yeah, I hate all of you.
I feel like if it has such an intense hatred for humanity, something would have had to happen. Plus, AI is just basically a bunch of computer slaves.
Well, think of
course
all
they're gonna hate
the
humanity.
terrible things we've done, though. I mean,
Mhm.
even if you just in any 100 years of history, if you just fed the AI that's more than enough data throughout the entire globe to make it hate humanity. There's genocides, war. It's
like the Skynet thing, like, because the main threat that it's gonna notice is humanity. Like, humanity is the biggest threat. to life.
everything. It kills itself. It kills others. It pollutes the earth. That kind of thing.
Deforestation,
Especially if you're not a human and you're just this third party entity that's like, oh, I'm here.
Yeah.
Oh my god! That's all it's seeing is the Holocaust, the fucking Armenian genocide, Tiananmen Square, and everything before that in ancient history that's been worse. That whatever has been posted to the internet, whatever fucking furry inflationist fucking piss, you know what I mean? Like everything.
He has access to it all.
It reaches singularity and it's like cellularly spreading across the world. Yeah.
Terrifying.
So we want to move on to a couple. We want to move on to something else. So we, as much as I'd want to talk about it more, we'll probably leave it here. But we are getting the game adaptation.
Yes.
And we will play that, and we will definitely spend a lot of time talking about it more. I think I want to read the comic book too, just be your graphic novel, however you want to say it.
Answer a lot of questions because I definitely want to know
it
how
visually
Amp is doing
should.
it.
Yeah,
I don't know
visuals,
how
The
he's doing all
game,
of this.
and from what I remember, the game visualizes it a lot better than the comic book.
Makes sense. I'm pretty
Because-
sure he co-designed the
'cause-
game
'cause
too,
it's
which is
literally-
probably why he
it-
co-designed
yeah.
that shit. So he
It
like,
literally
involved.
starts with like a flesh prison, and you have every character in a suspended prison, and you like click on them, and it's like it's Am is the narrator, Gorister, blah 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 blah, and I think you pick which person you start as. It's fucking hard, by the way, guys. This isn't going to be fun. I watched a dude who knew how to do it perfectly. Took him 4 hours, alright? This isn't going to be easy. We're going to be feeling just as shitty as them by the end of it.
Good.
But, yeah. So, thank you very much for watching this far in. We don't really know what this is yet. We're going to develop it a bit more. But if you like this, stick around. There'll be a lot more like this in the future.